Each and every iPhone is the same. Maybe you get a slightly larger screen, or you get a more advanced image stabilization module. But if you buy the iPhone 11, you probably can expect every feature on it to be roughly the same on the iPhone 12 or the iPhone 13. Sure, there are a couple of oddities, haptic touch versus 3D touch, and Pro Capture is reserved for the premier phones. But the devices are, generally speaking, the same. That's not the case over the scope of Android phones. Sure, many phones are the same, varying principally on quality or quantity of various spec sheet lines, the resolution and size of the screen, the amount of RAM, storage, or CPU. But then there are the oddities, often the result of unique partnership looking at a new convergence angle. The Red Hydrogen 1, the Dior Reverie, the Onkyo DP CMX1, the Panasonic DMC CM1. These phones each try to distinguish themselves from other Android phones, trying to dive into a niche with some unique gimmick. Non-standard for mobile phone digital audio hardware and the Onkyo, the custom video and photo hardware and software in the Red and Panasonic phones. There's a new Leica phone that takes a Sharp phone and adds some customization to the Android experience and a unique photo processing pipeline. The Sony flagship Xperia, despite lacking any cross-branding, offers some unique, non-standard functionality as well. And there's even talk of an Ohm digital phone in the pipeline. And you probably shouldn't buy any of them. Let's be clear, I used an Android phone as my principal portable phone for half a decade, and there's a lot of like about it. I switched from a Nokia N900 to an Nexus 4 running CyanogenMod in 2015, and then complemented it with a Panasonic DMC CM1 until replacing them with an Apple iPhone X, and later simply an Apple Watch before going back to a Nokia 3710 Fold when that died. I'm not saying you should get an Apple iPhone rather than an Android, although that's not an unrelated discussion point if you want to live in a curated garden. Rather, what I'm suggesting is you should really think long and hard about getting anything other than a mainstream Android phone. That my DMC CM1 never replaced the Nexus 4 is a case in point. The problem with the DMC CM1 was that it never graduated from Android 5.0, Lollipop, or API Level 21. It shipped initially in late 2014 with Android 4.4, KitKat, although a couple months later, Google released Android 5.0, Lollipop, so that by the time it was released in North America in June of 2015, it was shipping a major version behind other phones. Presumably realizing the problem that shipping a $1,400 phone with an outdated operating system in June would be, Panasonic released an over-the-air firmware update to the operating system on May 27th. The phone would never get an Android update past Lollipop, even though Panasonic would re-release the DMC CM1 hardware as the DMC CM10 as a connected camera without a dialer app on February 25th of 2016. At that point, Android 6.0 Marshmallow, API 23, was the current version. I'd suggest there are 3 reasons why people upgrade their phone, or at least I found there are 3 reasons for me. The first is because a new phone has new hardware. Maybe it's faster or has more RAM, but it also explains why I bought the Panasonic, or why you might buy that Onkyo phone, because of the better camera or audio hardware respectively. The Panasonic DMC CM1 really does have a brilliant camera mode, with a hardware switch to quickly activate it, a manual ring for controlling exposure based on the mode, and even a thread for filters or diopters. In goodish light and ignoring any software magic found on modern camera phones, this may still be the best camera on a commercial phone ever. Its 20 megapixel one sensor is similar to that found on the Sony RX100 III, which still sells for around $600. While it's also related to hardware, network support is really a different reason. Maybe you're moving, maybe you're switching carriers, maybe your carrier has simply decided to retire support for a frequency band, or is rolling out new frequencies which mean better coverage for you. This was one of the driving factors for me moving off the Nexus 4 to the DMC CM1, and later the iPhone X. Proper support for LTE, and then additional frequencies which my carrier was rolling out. If the point of a mobile phone is principally voice or data access over the mobile network, maximizing compatibility with the networks you use seems like a reasonable optimization, and in the end, one which will likely trump any other decision and drive you to eventually change your device. With Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and other technologies, it'll often make more sense to connect to your other devices wirelessly to your phone rather than target a convergence device, but maybe that's a subject for a different video. The third reason, after hardware and network compatibility, is software support. For some people, this might be the most important. Beyond simply Apple iOS versus Google Android, you may need to run applications which only support newer APIs or newer versions of the operating system. Until recently, phone manufacturers didn't make any sort of promises for updates. This changed with Google and Motorola when it was under their ownership. Motorola started promising at least 2 major updates for their phones, although since they were sometimes selling phones with an out-of-date version, this sounded more generous than it actually was. Google Pixel phones promised 3 years of major updates, up from 2 years on the Google's earlier Nexus phones. And that 3-year promise is now matched by Samsung, at least on their flagship phones. Apple doesn't have an official policy for their iOS devices, but because of the similarities between generations, it's common to get 4 to 6 years of updates. The iPhone 6S is coming up on its 6th anniversary at the end of September, and still runs the as-of-now current version of iOS 14. Devices are often retired when the OS needs more memory than with which the device had shipped, or when there's a significant architecture shift, such as moving from the 32-bit A6 to the 64-bit A7 chip with the iPhone 5S. While the iPhone 5S doesn't support iOS 14, Apple is still pushing out security and bug fixes for it as it approaches its 7th birthday. Sony's been getting a bit of press with their Xperia line, and there's been some confusing messaging about their update policy. As best as I can tell, the last official statement from Sony was 2 years from release, which would mean 1 or 2 major Android releases. And then you're out of luck. Just as they'd done before releasing the DMC CM1 in the US, 10 days before they released the DMC CM10, Panasonic released another firmware update. If you happen to have been an Android user in 2015, you probably recall the brouhaha that occurred in June, 1 month to the day after Panasonic released its initial Lollipop update. Researchers announced a critical bug in the media processing libraries, actually a series of them, which meant browsing the web, being sent multimedia or even instant messages, could mean you were being remotely exploited. While Google, Samsung, and many other manufacturers had fully patched their devices by the end of the summer, it took 8 months for users of the Panasonic DMC CM1 to get an updated firmware. Now, the nice thing about Android, in theory, is that it's open, and the absolute fastest way for many users to fix their device was to install community-built ROM, like CyanogenMod, the predecessor to Lineage OS. Community-built ROMs, or the underlying open-source projects, are the only way to get Apple-like lifetimes in the Android world, and for a mainline device, should serve you well if your only reason to upgrade is when your carrier changes its frequency bands. Unfortunately, that wasn't a practical option for many users, such as those of the DMC CM1, because Panasonic had locked the bootloader. But more so, and now we're finally getting the principal argument, even if users were to have installed a community ROM, they likely would have lost software support for the key functionality for which they had bought their devices. The DMC CM1, like Leica's recently released rebrand and some of Sony's Xperia phones, have custom camera applications or photo processing logic, which wouldn't work without proprietary binaries. Samsung has gone so far as to disable features like the camera if it finds the bootloader unlocked, even if the phone is still running the stock ROM. Contrast this with a more mundane Android device with a stock Android experience, and you're more likely to be able to use the device minus the increasing number of Google proprietary apps with community ROMs for much longer than the manufacturer had intended. There may be cases where one of these specific models ticks all the right boxes, and you can make immediate use of it, that it saves you time or solves a problem. If so, go for it. There are a few videos of people using the Sony Xperia as an on-camera monitor. Be aware, though, that unlike a proper monitor that you can probably amortize over 5 or more years and cost a fraction of the flagship Xperia at a similar size and feature set, you'll be hoping to get half that life out of your phone without sacrificing security or battery life. I've been consistently disappointed by companies making unique Android phones. They're more expensive to support given the unique hardware and often seem to be ignored by the manufacturer after shipping. Let me know if you've got any counterexamples or diamonds in the rough. I've generally found that the Google branded phones often last the longest and are consistently well supported by the community ROMs. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.